Welcome to the session on the regional security. I'm Wu Xinbo, professor and director at Center for American Studies at Fudan University in China, and also former visiting fellow at Brookings Institution. I want to thank Richard for organizing this event and for inviting me to this very timely conference. This panel, we have a very distinguished group of panelists, and each will speak from a regional perspective about China, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, and India. We will basically follow the same model as the previous one, but with some minor adjustments. This is already in the late afternoon, so we need a little bit more interaction. For each panelist, you will have 8 minutes, okay, for your presentation. Please keep it to 8 minutes. Then after you finish your presentation, stay on the podium, and I will throw one question to you, and you need to finish your response in 2 minutes. So after all the panelists finish your presentation, the floor will be open for questions and comments. With that, let me invite Sam Zhao, Professor Zhao Suishen, to the podium. Professor Zhao is from University of Denver and also the editor-in-chief of Journal of Contemporary China. So he will talk about China's fears and China's responses. So Sam, go ahead.
Thank you, Xinbo, for the introduction, and thank for Richard for having me here. Talking about China's position on the Trump administration, I see up and downs 3 times. Before the election, China was pretty much looking forward to have Trump to be elected. Why? Let me read one article by a Chinese scholar, Eric Lee. He wrote that not only because they like Trump better than Hillary Clinton, in fact, for them, anyone would be better. And they also like, from their perspective, although in the short term they think there were trade war and other issues, but China is good to compete. That's not the issue. In the long run, Chinese-American relations should become healthier, as the Chinese prefer a relationship with the United States that doesn't try to remake the world. The Chinese know how to compete and can deal with competitors. What the Chinese have always resented and resisted is an America that imposes its values and standards on everyone else. And the Trump's America is likely to break from that pattern. He has shown no desire to tell the other countries how to do things, and China can basically working with America not to be a world policeman. That's what I think rationale before the election. Now, after election, before the phone conversation with President Tsai Ing-wen and before Tillerson's congressional hearing talking about to deny China access to the South China Sea, China was still looking forward, but at that point, China became concerned and has a very mixed feelings about this. Let me also read one sentence by a Chinese scholar talking about that. Yan Xuetong wrote, in fact, that writing, I like it. He said he found similarities and differences. Mr. Trump's slogan to make America great again is very similar with Xi Jinping's motto that great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. So these two phrases have very similar or same meanings from his perspective. Each leader suggests his country has declined and claims that he will restore it into the top position in the world. But, that's what he said, the triumph of one country is built on the failure of the other. So the relationship is a zero-sum game. So they felt the pressure of competition from United States. Why they failed competition? Because of, in the economic front, American first. Slogan from Trump is something they think against China's interests, not only in those trading currency manipulation issues, but a very fundamental issue for the Chinese economic growth, globalization. China has been a major beneficiary of the globalization. China's economic growth in the last 30 years, though even particularly during those two double-digit growth, were a great result of globalization. So China thought the American first slogan, in fact, would start an anti-globalization process. China will be a victim. In that process, I can quote a lot, but you give us only 8 minutes, so I will not read those I quoted. The free rider issue from Chinese perspective is a very big issue. So in the economic front, in the security front, China also worried about peace through strength slogan from Trump's forthcoming administration at point. China see the U.S. would, although the pivot toward Asia-Pacific will be ended, but China was not sure if the strategic vacuum left by the United States will be filled by China. In fact, they are concerned Japan, some other nations will make their alliances, they work together against China. And in particular, at that time, now it's no longer issue, Russia. They thought Trump would build a good relationship with Russia. That would make China's relationship with the United States and China's position in the international strategic balance damaged. So there were strategic, geopolitical concern and economic concerns from Chinese perspective. But overall, I think Chinese still had hope because talking to those friends, I think may be in a better position. But talking to Chinese colleagues, I can tell that for them, Republican government traditionally would have a better relationship with China. The Democrats were kind of hypocritical on the relationship, but they really concerned Obama administration, although I think Obama did a very, very good job. But for the Chinese perspective, they really did not see Obama was a friend of China. They see Obama's strategic rebalance toward Asia-Pacific was to contain China. So they hope the Trump administration would come to that point. And also looking at the big picture, I think the Chinese side still had some very optimistic hopes. First, facing a divided nation. That's from writing that I read from Chinese publications. Trump would be preoccupied by domestic challenges such as economic growth, employment opportunities, and healthcare reform. Those domestic policy priorities would leave Trump with no time or energy to deal with China. And also, someone asked a question earlier. Trump looked for opportunities to invest for his own companies. Trump had deals with China in the past. So seeing him as a business person looking for trade or investment or business deals, China thought they can work with him from that perspective. And another thing here is that Trump's foreign policy would stay away from traditional liberal ideas and focus on economic interests. In that case, human rights, democracy will not be his priority. He will not lecture Chinese leaders on democracy, so China will find common economic interests to work with him. And so in the meantime, to talk about to withdraw from TPP, to have reduced its alliance, involvement in Asia-Pacific, to ask Japan, South Korea to share defense budgets and burdens. All those things, I think, from the Chinese perspective, is is very positive. And the U.S. closed the door of the immigrants, even from talking to friends. That will give opportunity for China to attract those talents to the Chinese society, for the Chinese to develop its economy. Eventually, I think the optimistic part now come true from many Chinese perspectives. The third stage now is after the after the phone conversation between President Xi Jinping and Trump. This is a huge, huge change from questioning one China principle, eventually not only to accept the one China principle, but also accept China's core national interests. So this is a very big change from Chinese perspective. Reading Chinese publications in the last several days, really, I think China was pleasantly surprised by this Secretary of State visit to accept Xi Jinping's definition of the new model of big power relationship. I can read a lot of the Chinese, I quoted a lot of Chinese publications. Just last few days ago in Beijing, there was a high-level development forum. In that forum, let me read Li Daokui, an economist. I think that was very interesting. He said, according to President Trump's American First, now he reinterprets American First as to focus on American domestic issues, to prioritize economic development. So that's very similar to Deng Xiaoping's 一个中心两个基本点, one center, two basic points. So we are on the same track. And based upon that kind of understanding, now reading the Chinese publications, China has, to a certain extent, positioned itself as a replacement to Americans' global leadership and to the leader of the globalization. Here is not international order, but at least globalization part. Xi Jinping's speech at Davos was a starting point. And last month in February, he talked about two guides. The China should guide international community jointly to build international order, to guide international community to maintain international security, which I think is very, very unprecedented from Chinese perspective. And some scholars also talking about China should join TPP. We talked about TPP earlier. Wang Huiyao, those people in the think tank, in a few last month, in fact, there were major conferences talking about China's role in the TPP. Could suppress Japan? Could the TPP is reach the mature stage? China just can grab those fruits. All those kind of talks, many other things I don't have time to talk about. But in any case, we see the up and downs of three stages. We don't know which next. Hopefully, China will not be surprised. I'll stop here.
Stay on one question. Okay, stay on. Well, there are many voices in China about whether or not China should join TPP, but I can promise you that's not going to happen. This is about security dynamics.
I'm glad someone can authoritatively give an answer.
This is about regional economic dynamics, security dynamics. My question for you would be, in the past, maybe China's primary security concern was Obama's rebalance strategy. But now this strategy is said to be over. So what would be China's major security concern and why?
I think China should be relaxed at this point. And even Zhang Zhaozong, the person in the military on the TV last week, let me quote what he said. In his Weibo, he talked about American, that's what in Chinese, but let me translate what he said. The Assistant Secretary of State, the acting Assistant Secretary of State announced, he said, Obama's Asian-Pacific rebalance and South Asia-Pacific has been over. And the Secretary of State, Tillerson, said, Obama's North Korea policy is a mistake, so cannot continue. Wah-ha, that's what he said. And this type of Trump's entirely reverse of U.S. policy is such a good thing for China. And Trump may want to, at this time, to take hands of, to 转而跟中国携手, to have hand with China, to 共商合作大计, to consult all those corporations. So China is so happy. He said there's two options here. One is to to suppress China, one is collaborate with China. U.S. is now trying to collaborate with China. So we don't have to worry about security issues from that perspective. But I do think China should worry about North Korea for sure.
Next is Professor Tanaka from Tokyo University. And you can stay here. You will have 8 minutes.
I don't have any slides.
Okay.
Thank you, Shimbo, for introducing me. It's my great pleasure to come back to Brookings, and it's a great pleasure. Security dynamics from Japan's perspective, I think, is the subject that I have to talk about. Here, we have to think of what were Japan's security concerns before the U.S. election campaigns. There were two major concerns. One was, of course, North Korea, nuclear weapons development as well as ballistic missile defense. And the second was China's increasingly strategic behavior in both East China Sea as well as South China Sea. And in response to these two concerns, Japan, over the past decades, made evolution about its security policy as well as its deployment patterns. Abe administration changed the age-long interpretation of the Constitution with respect to the collective self-defense right in order for Japan to collaborate more effectively with the United States in case of a North Korean contingency. Japan self-defense forces deployment made evolution over the past 2 decades, making more focus on the southwestern areas of Japan rather than northern orientation during the time of the Cold War. But then, during the campaign of the United States, big concerns emerged as the candidate Trump implied that the U.S. might abrogate alliance, in addition to making this commitment to of the withdrawal of TPP. And so, immediately after the election, where Mr. Trump won, Prime Minister Abe took a very quick move to have interaction with the president by coming to New York to see him. After the establishment or the victory of President Trump, his inauguration speech was also worrying to us. I think I don't need to quote, but the passage such as, for many decades, we've enriched foreign industry at the expense of American industry, subsidized the armies of other countries while allowing for the very sad depletion of our military. We've defended other nations' borders while refusing to defend our own, and spent millions of dollars overseas while America's infrastructures has fallen into disrepair and decay. Probably the last sentence may have some merits of mentioning, but Mr. Trump's depiction of America exploited by others is, I think, to us allies, rather peculiar. despite the dynamic change of economic growth and the remarkable rise of China, the United States is still by far the largest economy of the world. The US per capita GDP is the highest among the G7 countries. The growth rate of the US GDP is also the highest among G7 countries. And in the military spending, despite, again, the remarkable rise of China's military spending, the US military spending is still at least 3 times bigger than China's. The US having this self-image of being exploited worries us. But on the other hand, after the inauguration or after the presidential election, the fact that Mr. Trump appointed General Jim Mattis, Secretary of Defense, and Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, was, I think, assuring. Although sub-cabinet levels we still don't know, but it was very reassuring that Secretary Mattis chose Northeast Asia as his first visit abroad. When he came to Tokyo in late January, he assured the leaders in Tokyo that the basic strategy of the United States would not change. This reassurance was reinforced at the summit meeting between Prime Minister Abe and President Trump over the weekends in early February. And the Japan-US joint statement that was issued after that, again, was quite positive. I quote one passage, I quote, "The two leaders affirmed that Article 5 of the US-Japan Treaty of Mutual Cooperation and Security covers the Senkaku Islands. They oppose any unilateral action that seeks to undermine Japan's administration of these islands." The US and Japan also call on countries concerned to avoid actions that would escalate tensions in the South China Sea, including the militarization of outposts, and to act in accordance with international law. I think it was good that the US administration is working to maintain the basic strategy that the US had traditionally followed in Asia-Pacific since the end of the Second World War. So we are relieved, but nevertheless, we still have some concerns. Well, in the economic areas, G20's statement last week didn't include the specific mention of opposition to protectionism. And then some documents USTR made implicated the US would not respect the decision of the WTO. Despite the reassuring move in Northeast Asian security trends, we are still somehow uncertainty. And what should the US allies and friends do facing this United States? That's a big challenge. And if I might offend some of American citizens, please excuse me. But I think what allies of US should do is, if I might use a strange word, canalize the Trump administration toward the direction of preserving the traditionally strong commitment the US made to the liberal world order. And specifically, what can allies do? That's a big, difficult questions. But I think we need to do a lot of things. We need to communicate with the people in the Trump administration. We need to communicate with those American citizens who are really interested in preserving the liberal international order. And we need to persuade those American citizens who may have doubts about the merit of preserving the liberal international order. The Prime Minister Abe went to Europe last week in order to facilitate, I think, good relations between Europe and the United States. And with Europe, United States, Japan, and many other countries which have stakes in the preservation of the liberal international order, we have to do all sorts of things. And one specific thing that might help is for Japan to increase its defense budget, so that the allies are serious in preserving the liberal international order. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanaka-san. The question for you is really, from your perspective, what's the difference in Japan's security policy under the Trump administration and under if Hillary Clinton was elected, or it would be pretty much the same given Abe's own political agenda?
Well, I think, you know, the Trump administration, as I said, gives us some uncertainties. But then the North Korean threats are real. And Chinese geostrategic behaviors are a concern that we have. And so basically what Japan is going to do is the same. Under Mrs. Clinton becomes president, or even now. But then I think what I would like to say is that additionally to these basic necessities, we need to have properly make efforts to create a framework of having a stronger alliance with the United States by joining hands with many Americans and others.
Let me push the envelope a little bit. Sorry, this is a late afternoon. People need some, stability. If Trump says, well, we cannot handle North Korean nuclear issue, we will talk about it tomorrow. Japan, you can choose to have nuclear weapons. Go ahead. What would you recommend?
Well, having a nuclear weapon is not an option for Japan. It's not. I think even North Korea still already has some devices, and then we believe our basic assumption of having and maintaining a good alliance with the United States, which has extended a deterrence.
Thank you, Tanaka-san. Next, let's invite Professor Yung Sung Ha from East Asia Institute. Mm-hmm. You have a PowerPoint? Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Maybe we can move to.
It's very nice for me to return back to Brookings and also to have a very short presentation on the difficult questions. To elaborate security dynamics of the Asia-Pacific from the perspective of Korea's fears and Korea's responses, it was the assigned topic. Okay. I will briefly discuss four major issues of Trump's America versus Xi Jinping China, North Korean nuclear and missile programs, deployment of thought system in ROK, and the exclusive nationalism in East Asia. But if time is not enough, I will skip the last one. First, security dynamics of the Asia-Pacific will be heavily dependent upon the future of U.S.-China relations. Although it is still too early to forecast the future of U.S.-China relations, Trump's Asia-Pacific policies is now shaping based on the two basic principles of America first and peace through strength. In response, Xi Jinping maintains the current China's new type of international relations, which include new type of major power relations based on the first principle of the no conflict, mutual respect, and win-win cooperation, and also new type of neighborhood diplomacy based on the second principle of community of common destiny, one belt, one road, and strong assertion of three essential interests. Considering the principle 1 and 2 in the Asia-Pacific, China will try to maintain peaceful development with the United States up until the middle of the 21st century. There will be cautious stability between two big powers. On the other hand, there will be 4 potential hotspots in the region, such as South China Sea, East China Sea, Taiwan, and Korean Peninsula. In short-term perspective, as we are now having breathing time in South China Sea, East China Sea, and Taiwan, I will narrow down my discussion on the Korean Peninsula. Let me go over to North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. In his recent visit to Seoul, U.S. Secretary of State Tillerson stated that, first of all, major efforts of U.S. and its allies to stop the development of North Korean nuclear missile program have failed. Second, the U.S. and related countries should pursue new approaches to stop the North Korea's nuclearization instead of the previous policy of strategic patience. These new approaches will include strengthened comprehensive sanctions, and military options, possible military options on the table, and also the increasing role of China. However, it is almost certain this approach will not very much successfully function or work for the goal of North Korea's non-proliferation because China would not accept this approach as U.S. as much as U.S. won. And also North Korea is already fully ready for this type of approach. In parallel, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi at the press conference of the National People's Congress mentioned that two sides of the DPRK and US and ROK are like two accelerating trains coming toward each other with neither side willing to give way. Thus, he proposed, as a first step, suspension of North Korea's nuclear and missile activities, and for suspension of ROK and U.S. military exercise. As a second step, dual-track approaches of denuclearization of North Korea and peace treaty on the Korean Peninsula. However, Foreign Ministry of the DPRK in October 2015 issued a statement, peace treaty should go first, and then denuclearization can be discussed. In addition, on April 26, 2016, North Korea already proposed suspension for suspension. In July 2016, North Korea conducted its fifth nuclear test. It means that the Trump's new approaches and also Wang Yi's proposal cannot have a much chance to of success to stop North Korea's nuclear efforts. On the other hand, facing the imminent and grave threats of North Korean nuclear and missile capabilities, ROKs and its allies should try to develop real new approaches, including the comprehensive sanctions, development of reliable deterrence and defense capabilities, and thirdly, dialogue, not for just dialogue, but for the initial step of denuclearization, and finally, a signal sending of the potential success of a parallel strategy of non-nuclear economic development as an alternative way, which might promote self-help in North Korea. Next topics I would like to briefly mention on the deployment of THAAD system in ROK. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi strongly expressed, once again at the National Party's Congress, China's opposition against the deployment of THAAD in ROK because of the potential risks of China's strategic security. China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson once again summed up China's position a little bit more sophisticated way. She said that China understands the South Republic of Korea's concern about its own security, but it must not be so at the expense of the security interests of China. On the other hand, the U.S. Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, stated in Seoul that the THAAD is purely defensive against North Korea. The United States would urge China to change its position on punishing South Korea for the THAAD. In addition, he asked China to engage with North Korea for the elimination of the original reason of the THAAD system. From the perspective of Republic of Korea, there are 4 dimensions of the deployment of THAAD system in ROK. First of all, legitimacy security concerns of ROK against the threat of DPRK's nuclear and missile program. Second, ROK and U.S. alliance. And third, security interests of China. And fourth, domestic politics of ROK. It means that ROK should very cautiously take care of the primary security concerns of ROK with the help of the alliance, without giving negative impact on the security interests of China and domestic politics of ROK. Fourth topics on the exclusive nationalism in East Asia. In spite of the historical influence of rather peaceful world order in this region, East Asia still experiencing rising period of nationalism in contrast to the European experience of declining period of nationalism. In addition, because of the historical animosity of colonial war experience, ROK Japan, ROK China, China-Japan relations are suffering from international politics of emotion. To avoid this kind of emotional deterioration in the region, key actors in the region should try to follow three-pronged principles. First, primary concern of developing reciprocal interests should be emphasized. Second, there should be a frank consensus. The historical animosity cannot be cured or solved in a rather short period of several generations. Finally, political utilization of historical animosity should be absolutely avoided. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ha. The question for you is, it seems the Trump administration is assuming a more proactive posture on the North Korean nuclear issue, while Secretary Tillerson said all the options are on the table. So as compared with the Obama administration, now South Korea feels more concerned, more hopeful on the nuclear issue.
As I mentioned, both the Trump's new approaches and Wang Yi's new approach will not have much chances to solve the dilemma of nuclear issues on the Korean Peninsula. In the case of the U.S., as I mentioned, a little bit more strengthening sanctions. North Korea is well preparing for that kind of strengthening sanctions. In addition, if we talk about the possibility of military options on the table, I think North Korea is considered fully enough almost the final stage of that kind of confrontation between the escalation of military maneuvering. In that sense, there should be a little bit more sophisticated way of new approaches, not only the sanction, military options, but Wang Yi's argument, the dialogue, two-track dialogue, that is also has not been very much successful to solve the dilemma. So what I did suggest, we would rather propose a little bit more sophisticated four-way. Sanction is, of course, inevitable, and also deterrent and defense mechanism is absolutely necessary. Dialogue is also should be open, but in addition to that, North Korea should decide it. They should give up their own nuclear weapons for their own future. That will be hinged on their decision. In that sense, all the relevant countries should give a signal sending that there is another better way of solving the nuclear issues on the Korean Peninsula. Final decision will be done by North Koreans themselves.
Thank you, Professor Ha. We'll come back to this issue tomorrow afternoon. Next, let me invite Dean Liao from Rajaratnam School of International Studies. So you have 8 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, 8 minutes. So the question set before, or the theme set before me rather, was Southeast Asia's fears and Southeast Asia's response. And I will start by saying that implicit in that theme is one of the problems and one of the fears for Southeast Asia already. This question, is there such a thing as a Southeast Asia fear and or response in any meaningful collective sense? Okay, and this is something I will unpack later, but let me just leave that on the table first, and then start as predictably and like everyone else has with the Trump administration. One of the, Stan Roth articulated it very well, the question of whether the US, the Trump administration is even aware of the region of Southeast Asia, let alone the organization called ASEAN. And more importantly is the discernible absence at this point of time of a strategic, holistic, strategic and holistic thinking on East Asian issues, let alone Southeast Asia. I think Southeast Asians, if I may put it this way, Southeast Asians have been spoilt by the pivot, right? Okay, the pivot has raised expectations which the Trump administration has no intention and no interest of meeting, let alone surpassing. As the great American strategic thinker Woody Allen said once, that 80% of success is just showing up. Nowhere is this mantra more relevant, more crucial than for ASEAN, right? For those of you who are familiar with ASEAN. ASEAN makes a big issue of President Obama's efforts to visit almost every Southeast Asian state. He would have visited everyone if he managed to pull off the Brunei trip for a number of ASEAN meetings sometime in 2013. And then, of course, Secretary Clinton visited them all. The concern really is that President Trump will not turn up, and that would automatically, in a sense, downgrade the perception of this whole range of ASEAN-related institutions. If we look at what has been, what has taken place so far, to be fair, I think, and I think Stan Roth alluded to it as well, that there has been, there's some relief at the surprising element of continuity and familiarity in American policy in Asia since the inauguration, right? Especially on Northeast Asia. The bad news, of course, is on the trade side of the ledger, and this is something that a number of Southeast Asian states are concerned about, because what's going to happen is you're going to have a very unbalanced kind of engagement, right? A very strong, forceful defense and security presence, and absence on the trade side of the ledger. And related to that, of course, for Southeast Asia is the question of China, right? China wants to, in a sense, regain its historical place in the region. We certainly do not begrudge them of their place. The question is how they intend to go about doing this. And the concern in many Southeast Asian states is that a number of things. Number one, China has basically learned how to game ASEAN. Okay, that speaks more of ASEAN's weakness rather than China's sophistication, because it's not very difficult to game ASEAN, right? Secondly, I think that China has decided to use a dual-track approach to Southeast Asian states. It's either economic inducements or diplomatic browbeating. And thirdly, China has, on a number of occasions already, demonstrated that they have no problems trying to play a divide and rule game in ASEAN. Okay, and again, in the interest of time, I will not cite any examples now, but you might want to ask me that question, and I will cite the examples then. And all this is linked together in this perennial concern that Southeast Asia has about Sino-US relations and having to choose sides, right? You hear this all the time. Now, there is a minor problem with that assumption, and that minor problem is this: to choose sides assumes that you have sides to choose from, right? And herein lies the problem, because if the US is in some way or other, if not absent, retrenching in its engagement in the region, there's really not much to choose from, right? It's back to 1973, 1974. I always find that analogy striking. You look at how Southeast Asian states basically queued up to go to Peking in 1974, immediately after the American withdrawal from Saigon. So Nevertheless, okay. So one problem is whether or not you have you have sites to choose from. The second is, of course, in the situation where Southeast Asian states find themselves having to choose sites, it implies, of course, a zero-sum game. And the problem with zero-sum games in this particular complex and interdependent world is that people will end up losing at some point or other. Okay, so that is not a position that the small states of Southeast Asia would want to be found in. And that brings me to this point about back to ASEAN again. What should Southeast Asia do? They've been doing two things, as they've always done. Number one is focus quite heavily on their bilateral engagements. And over and above that, there is this question of ASEAN. Now, ASEAN is a very odd entity. ASEAN celebrates its 50th anniversary this year, so you're going to see a lot of self-congratulatory sort of messaging and backpatting, which is fine. It's a 50th anniversary. But I do hope that there's some soul-searching as well. Soul-searching on a number of counts. First is ASEAN needs to ask itself, is it really a 50-year-old organization? I will put to you that there is a case to be made to see ASEAN as a 20-year-old organization. Right? 1995 was when ASEAN started expansion with the CMLV states, a process. And the question then to ask is, what sort of expectations? I mean, 20 years old, officially you're not an adult yet, right? So the question to ask is, what sort of expectations you have of a 20-year-old organization as opposed to a 50-year-old organization. So something I just want to put out there, and something I hope that ASEAN itself asks itself. But the more important challenge for ASEAN is this perennial question of ASEAN unity and the struggle really that ASEAN is going through in order to sort of strengthen or reinforce this unity. I think these are not exactly the good times for ASEAN to be absolutely serious. And it has a lot to do with their different interests and their different strategic perspectives and the state of relations with the major powers. And I'll end by saying this. There's a lot of attention on the South China Sea, naturally so, obviously so, necessarily so. But unfortunately, those of us who look at regional security issues have failed to see that the major development is not in the South China Sea, but has been in the Mekong region. And that is where the Chinese have really been able to extend their influence into the ASEAN process, okay? In the case of the South China Sea, it is an extension of Chinese presence into the geographical heart of Southeast Asia, right? But it is in the Mekong where they have really enhanced their leverage over the organization. Okay, I will end there.
Thank you. The question for you is, to what extent the Trump presidency will get ASEAN countries on the South China issue to emphasize more on the interaction with China rather than rely on the U.S. involvement and counterbalance against China?
Well, I think that I remember once having a conversation with an Obama administration official, and he was saying that we are very supportive of ASEAN, which is a good thing to hear. We are prepared to let ASEAN take the lead. Now, that one I'm not too sure was necessarily a good thing to hear on the South China Sea, okay? Precisely for reasons I mentioned earlier, that in order for ASEAN to take the lead, it assumes that ASEAN is on the same page on the South China Sea. And the fact of the matter is, it is not yet. Hopefully, it will arrive on the same page. It is not yet. There are a number of holdouts for reasons which I don't think I need to get into. I think you're all aware of. So because of that, certain Southeast Asian states still take the position that it is important to have the US present and engage in that region. But they do not, having said that, they are not saying it or they're not viewing it through rose-tinted glasses, because Southeast Asian states also know that at the end of the day, it is highly questionable whether it serves American interests, whoever is the president, whatever is the administration, to risk a very deep and complex relationship with China over over some features whose status we're not even sure of.
The last but not least is Tanvi Menon from the Brookings Institution. She will talk about the Indian perspective.
Thank you. Like the rest of the panelists, I was asked to talk about Indian fears and Indian responses. If I had to summarize kind of Indian concerns in the Asia-Pacific, or what the Defense Department refers to the Indo-Asia-Pacific, I'd say it's too much China and too little US. In terms of China, there's been concern and uncertainty since about 2008, 2009, but I think especially over the last couple of years, concern and uncertainty about Chinese intentions and actions. India does not want to see an Asia dominated by Beijing in which China can impose its will on the other countries in the region. But there's also, beyond kind of this broader view of China's role in the Asia-Pacific, this partly stems from real differences between the two countries, particularly on the bilateral and regional side. On the bilateral side, as many of you probably know, there's an existing border dispute, though it's actually been a fairly quiet one, especially compared to India's border dispute with Pakistan. No shots have been fired at the border for a number of years, and there's a border dispute kind of management mechanism in place that overall has worked. There have, however, been some incidents in the last couple of years that have caused tensions, including one during President Xi's visit to India in September 2014. The second concern in terms of the China-India dynamic from Delhi's perspective, and this is a growing concern, is China's relationship with Pakistan, which India sees as deepening largely as a result of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, and essentially President Xi kind of doubling down on that. And if you think about Prime Minister Modi's first year, he came in actually with fairly kind of positive inclinations towards Beijing, had been to China 4 times as the chief minister of the state of Gujarat, and reached out to the Chinese leadership, and the Chinese leadership reciprocated. He also did things like essentially played down a visit, a meeting, the first kind of meeting he had as Prime Minister with the Dalai Lama, etc. And this was seen as him indicating that he would, and signaling that he would take a different tack towards China than his predecessors. But both the border incident as well as the announcement of the China-Pakistan economic corridor has essentially there's not been discussion since then about kind of that Modi-Xi a version of a bromance as such. Tibet, of course, is an existing problem. It hasn't been as prominent in the last few years as it had been before, but that might come up again. The Dalai Lama is scheduled to visit Arunachal Pradesh, which China claims he's scheduled to visit in April, so we might see that come up again. But you've also seen, not just in terms of the China-Pakistan relationship, both of which, of course, are nuclear powers, and so concerns India for that reason as well. But there's increasing concern in India about Chinese engagement and activity with almost all India's neighbors, and in kind of India's maritime neighborhood as well, particularly through the Belt and Road Initiative. It doesn't see this as, it sees it as a national project. It sees this as not just a commercial initiative. It sees this as having strategic motivations or at least implications for India. And it has been particularly concerned about the use of Chinese economic leverage to shape economic, political, and strategic options of countries like Sri Lanka and Nepal, but has also been watching very closely what has been happening in South Korea and Mongolia most recently. Two areas where there was supposed to be kind of Sino-Indian cooperation and was supposed to kind of alleviate some of the tension, the economic side and multilateral issues in the kind of multilateral arena. There continues to be some cooperation, but these have also run into trouble over the last few years. Underlying all this in India, there is, especially on the part of public, kind of a lack of trust in China as such. And even when you see a positive story, there is kind of people waiting for the other shoe to drop on that front. There's also, frankly, a lack of knowledge on both sides of each other. And there's an asymmetry in terms of India and the Indian public paying a lot more attention to China than is the case on the other side. There's also, interestingly, and this is a fairly recent phenomena, in the 80s and 90s you used to hear in India, the US wants to prevent India's rise. You don't hear that about the US anymore. You hear it being said about China, that China, which through its relationship with Pakistan, through its preventing Indian membership, a permanent membership of the UN Security Council or membership of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, is essentially trying to prevent India from taking on a greater global and regional role. In terms of the US, I think the biggest kind of concern related to the US in the security context is the uncertainty about what that role is going to be, its role, its presence, what the extent of that is going to be. But there's also uncertainty in terms of the Trump administration, where it stands on China. We've seen a lot of kind of different versions, and you can interpret that many different ways, from tweets during the period of the transition to most recently Secretary Tillerson's visit to Beijing. And India, like a number of other allies and partners in the region, would have seen the statements coming out of there with some concern. But they will watch President Xi's visit very closely as well and see where things will play out. India does not want to see, and I think this echoes somewhat Joseph said, it doesn't want to see a very conflictual US-China relationship, either strategically or economically for that matter, while it might like what David Dollar earlier said, which is the US to get greater market access for various international firms. It does not want to see a trade war that can affect the whole region. But it also doesn't want to see a very close US-China relationship, essentially a G2. Many people in DC roll their eyes when they hear that and say, oh, that's never going to happen. But for Indian policymakers who grew up, who are now in the senior level positions, they kind of entered the service at a time when this did happen to India, when US-China, because in the early 70s, they didn't quite have a Nixon shock, but it came close in terms of affecting their strategic options. And kind of broadly underlying these concerns about China and US in the region is the uncertainty about the maintenance of the rules-based regional order and what might happen with kind of too much China and too little US. This is particularly significant at a time when India does not have, it is trying to do more, but it does not have the capabilities to ensure this alone, and it really wants a stable regional order at a time it needs to grow economically. Briefly on the responses, there are, I would say, overarching kind of three basic responses India has taken. One is to build domestic, or at least it's trying to, I should add, it's trying to do. One is on the domestic side, which is building capabilities, economically as well as militarily, and India, of course, does have a nuclear capability as well. Second, in terms of its kind of broader neighborhood, kind of doubling down and trying to put more efforts towards engagement. This includes engagement with China, where we've seen kind of more investment, more of an investment relationship, a more merger and acquisition activity, and a higher level of political engagement than we've ever seen before, not just bilaterally, but also in terms of the BRICS, as well as the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which India is a founding member of as well. In South Asia, with its neighbors, Indian policymakers are realizing that they need to be, as one recently put it, more generous and effective in their own engagement with these countries and deliver on the projects and initiatives and cooperations they've been talking about. But India is also kind of expanding and consolidating its relationships in the kind of broader neighborhood, particularly in Southeast Asia. Some countries India has had greater engagement with, Vietnam and Singapore, Myanmar as well, and others kind of new relationships. Third, what India has kind of broadly taken as an approach is kind of engaging with other partners, what would kind of call outside its extended neighborhood. The U.S. is a big part of this, and India would like to see kind of a continuing U.S. presence in the region. You've already seen kind of U.S.-India relations today stand, or at least on November 8th stood better than they've ever been in the past and closer than they've ever been in the past, particularly on the defense and security side. And India would like to continue this relationship, to be on that trajectory. I think many in the U.S. would have liked to see it, in fact, improve India to do more on this side. And so you've seen the Indian government engage with the Trump administration. Somewhere you can see Modi's approach as being somewhere between Chancellor Merkel's and Prime Minister Abe's. There's a wait and see, but there's also a fair level of high-level engagement. The Indian National Security Advisor is here this week. A couple of weeks ago, the Indian Foreign Secretary was here, and we think there might be a Modi visit sometime later this year, perhaps as early as May. India is also engaging with U.S. allies and partners in the region, Japan, Australia, South Korea, in a much more systematic fashion than it used to in the past. I think the relationship with Japan perhaps stands out a little more than the others. But India is also, while it's doing all that, is also continuing to engage with Russia, which it also sees very much part of this kind of broader Asia-Pacific region. It's doing these things bilaterally, trilaterally. It has 3 trilaterals in place: a Russia, China, India trilateral, an India, Japan, US one, and an India, Australia, Japan one. It's also trying regionally to, as Joseph pointed out, it was realized and heard from Southeast Asians that India didn't show up enough. So it's trying to get better at that and been more active at summits like the ADMM Plus meeting. And finally, it is speaking up or trying to speak up on issues that matter to the region a little more, including on freedom of navigation and issues related to that. I will end with saying the biggest challenge for India vis-a-vis this region in some parts is to be taken seriously, but partly that's because of its inability in the past to implement some of these things that it's talked about. So these are planned activities. It's much better at doing it than it was before, but the Indian Foreign Secretary used this line in a statement for another kind of relationship, but he said intentions don't necessarily translate into outcomes. And I think this is what India is going to be judged on in terms of its engagement with the region. Can it actually deliver on this approach it's trying to take?
Thank you. The question for you is, in the past several years, the strategic communities in both U.S. and India have embraced the concept of Indo-Pacific. Mm-hmm. So would the Trump administration bring any change to this?
It's interesting because I think India has embraced and it's actually fairly recent even for India to embrace this concept of an Indo-Pacific. It was only recently, even with the Modi government, that they've even officially started to use that term. In the U.S., I think there was even more reluctance, and partly because of just that it was hard to grapple with. If you think about the entire region, if nothing else, the Defense Department, there are 3 commands that actually even jurisdictionally take care of this region. And so it was a bit of kind of unwieldy in that sense. But more recently, over the last kind of year or two, we did hear the term Indo-Asia-Pacific, which is a bit of a mouthful. And I think this was still a very much a concept in development. I think at this point, it's not so much the idea of concepts that there's expectation of or a desire. I don't think India would worry that much about whether or not it will see a kind of a Trump stamp of approval on this. But I think what they would like to see, whether it is through separate, in these separate areas or together, which is the U.S. being a kind of steadying presence. It doesn't buy this idea of Asia for Asians. Prime Minister Modi has said, when I look east, I see the western shores of the United States. So he just wants, I think at this point, there's uncertainty, and at this point, they'd just like to see the U.S. actually actively be engaged in the region, and it's not so much about the concept, but the actual reality of it.
So don't talk too much, right? Okay.
Yes.
All the presentations by the panelists have been done, so let me invite them to move to the stage. And we have about less than 20 minutes. We have about 50 minutes. So floor is open, and you will be challenged and tested by the audience. Let me go first round to collect 4 to 5 questions. Then if we have time, we can come back. Jonathan Pollack. Please be brief.
You know how difficult that is for me. I see a theme that runs across all of the presentations, and that is the jarring effects of having a very, very different person as President of the United States. And all the countries here in the regions are trying to understand, adapt, and so forth. But in a way, Trump presents, for at least some of these actors, a very, very different possibility. So I'm going to direct this at Sui-Sheng. We lost someone very, very big in our field last week, Dick Solomon. And if Dick were here today, he would talk about how the Chinese always want a special connection to someone at the top of an American administration, or perhaps any kind of an administration, not necessarily the United States, but U.S. in particular. So beyond all the clutter of what the talking heads in China say and all that, does China really care, truly, and so does Xi Jinping really care, as long as he has a channel to the very top of this administration? Does all the rest just sort of fall by the wayside?
Move to the back, the lady, right, on the left. Yes.
Thank you. There's opinion in China that the tension in Korea Peninsula and the THAAD employment has proved that China's policy to North Korea in the past decade, it's a total failure, and China become the biggest loser in this tension. And we can see some clues in the conversation between Wang Yi and Tillerson that China is showing some kind of cooperative attitude to the United States. So I'm not sure. I'll give this question to you, which panelists. So I just ask, do you think it is possible that China give up, taking this tension as a turning point, and China will give up the previous policy as the semi-alliance with North Korea and to embrace a brand new one, which means more cooperation with the United States and impose more pressure on North Korea? Thank you.
Please identify yourself.
I'm Li Liang from China and currently a visiting scholar in Johns Hopkins SAIS.
Thank you. I saw someone right in the back. Yeah. Yes.
First off, thank you for the presentations to all the panelists. My name is Luis Walters with DHS, and I had a question because none of the panelists actually brought up terrorism or the impacts that terrorism has on the region. And so my question is, with the I guess the shortcomings that the major terrorist organizations are having in the Middle East and the potential return of these foreign fighters to various countries within the region, particularly Southeast Asia and South Asia, what's the potential for any kind of cooperation or alliances to kind of combat these the potential threats coming back?
So,
thank you.
You may want to comment on this question later. This gentleman, yes.
Thank you. Zhang Jiahuan, visiting fellow in CSIS. A few days ago, some reporters said that Trump's administration is crafting big new arms sales to Taiwan. I'm curious that is there any potential reasons or purposes that Trump's administration leaked such kind of information just before Xi Jinping going to visit Washington, D.C.? Thank you.
Yeah, the last one. Yeah, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. I'm Katsumoto Biajima from University of Pittsburgh. I would like to ask Mr. Zhao about Southeast Asian perspective about Japanese policy towards Southeast Asia, especially more security role there. After we see the fail on the change of U.S. policy to Southeast Asia. And also I would like to ask Mr. Tanaka about what Japan can do or what Japan should do for this region.
Okay, so Cecil, you will be the first. Please be brief.
Jonathan, I think first of all, I join you to have condolence to Dick. It's big loss to the China study field, to Washington community for sure. In terms of the personal collection, I think for the Chinese leaders, they are always tried. I think they have established with Trump, Kushner, the son-in-law seems has been a good connection for China to have. But I don't know how much they can trust this type of personal connection in Washington. Xi Jinping, he's a strong man. He has consolidated his power, but he should understand in Washington, there are so many power centers other than the White House in Washington. In Congress, there are 435 people. Everyone thinks they can be the president. So I think they are learning this process. So I don't know if I can answer that question. I don't think they are in any ease at this time. And the other lady in the back talking about China collaboration with the United States on North Korea issue. I think from Chinese perspective, they must think that's a bargaining chip, but that's totally wrong from my perspective, because when Xinbo asked me which was the most dangerous security threat to China, I did not answer that directly, but in my mind it was North Korea. China has been playing fire on North Korea issues, especially those sanctions and nationalist demonstration in China against South Korean business. Those are very, very dangerous for China. Eventually, China will have to swallow the bit fruit China already put together there. For arms sale to Taiwan at this time, I think that has been going on for quite a while. Why at this moment it becomes big news? Could be, my guess, could be that Trump is putting out another bargaining chips before the summit, say, if you help us on the North Korea issue or some other issues, we'll not sell the arms. Otherwise, we'll sell. But we don't know if it's going to happen at all at this time.
Tanaka, sir?
Well, speak. Japan has consistently been attaching great importance to its relations with Southeast Asia. It's going to attach great importance to Southeast Asia in the coming years. Diplomatically, Japanese prime ministers attended every sort of ASEAN-related summits and sent all ministerial level meetings all the time. And so ASEAN's working is in the interest of Japan in Asia-Pacific. Traditionally, Japan's ODA went to Southeast Asia in a large quantity, and it's going to in the future too. And then in some new development is Japan's efforts to improve the capacity of Southeast Asian countries' Coast Guard, the personnel training as well as providing ODA loans to purchase more Coast Guard ships.
Okay, Professor Liao.
Okay. yeah, just to echo Dr. Tanaka's point about the relationship between Japan and Southeast Asia, I think it's fair to say that Southeast Asia has really welcomed the very proactive role. In fact, it's been a while since we've seen such a proactive Japanese leadership and Japanese foreign policy. I think it is striking, for example, a lot of people make a very great play about the Philippine President Duterte cozying up to China. But you remember, after his visit to Beijing, where he said some not so nice things about the US and its president, he immediately went to Tokyo. But the media never really covered that the way they covered all the sexy stuff about US-Philippine relations. But there was substantive progress made in bilateral relations between the Philippines and Japan as a result of that visit. And it's not just with the Philippines, with Vietnam as well, with other Southeast Asian states. And I think Southeast Asia also very much appreciates Prime Minister Abe's very quick move to engage President Trump, right? I mean, he moved faster than any global leader to engage President Trump. Southeast Asia appreciates Japan's efforts to try to sort of salvage the TPP. Also, very interestingly, when Japanese authorities sent that letter on Brexit, warning against the risk of Brexit, that was very impressive when viewed again from Southeast Asia, that Japan was really being proactive to do something where the US seems to be sort of slagging. On the question on terrorism, yes, there's a concern for regional fighters coming back, although I would be a bit cautious about playing up the extent of that, because for a number of reasons. Number one, there are many Southeast Asian fighters who have actually fought and died there. Number two, unlike Afghanistan, Southeast Asian fighters have basically, to them is a hijrah, right? So they have gone over to Syria with their families. Now, so they're prepared to live in an Islamic state, in an authentic Islamic state, right? So they didn't quite have plans to come back. Logistically, even if they had plans to come back, it will not be very easy, because it's not just the fighters themselves coming back, it's the fighters coming back with their families, those who went with families. And in any case, even the single fighters coming back, it will be quite challenging, because the local authorities are awaiting their return, to some extent, in some countries at least. But the danger is still that all you need is a couple of them to be able to find their way to southern Philippines. And the reason why it's a danger is because the real problem is not so much foreign fighters returning in droves, but it's the locals who never made it in the first place. You know, they were radicalized, they were prepared to fight, but they never made it to Syria. Hence, the call from Syria for them to wage jihad at home, or at least in the region. You know, and then you have a very weakly governed southern Philippines, right? And that is the area where everyone is looking at with great trepidation, that it's going to play the role that he's been playing for a while already, you know, for consolidation, for recruitment, and that's all that sort of stuff. And that ties in with the role of the US, because as you would know, southern Philippines was basically the arena for Operation Enduring Freedom Philippines, right, which was a 12, 13-year operation launched in 2002, costing the US several $100 million, with the explicit objective of eliminating the Abu Sayyaf group in 2002. Today, I would venture that the Abu Sayyaf group is stronger than it was in 2002. So, there's something to think about there.
Thank you. We don't have much time for the next round. Let's thank all the panelists for their great performance. And with that,